All right. So Google says we are live, or excuse me, YouTube says we are live. Well, welcome everyone, Virtual History 360. Mr. Wade, hey, Mark, you're in here bright and early. I appreciate that. My Monday was good. We are in testing season right now. And let me tell you, it's interesting to monitor students for an hour taking a math test when you can't watch them actually test, and all you get to do is walk around and make sure they're doing the right thing. So that's been my Monday. How was your Monday? Oh, I saw your post first day of college. How's that going? Give you a second to work on that. Give people time to get in before we officially get started here. Oh, it is Monday. Like I said, it's 7 o'clock. Dr. M is great. Nice. I don't know who Dr. M is, but I'm happy for you. Having good teachers, hopefully, I can live up to that one day. But yeah, so it's Monday, it's 7 o'clock. It's nice that it's getting closer to summer because it's still bright out. I remember a few months ago, I was sitting here at 7 o'clock and it was getting dark already. If you look right about here, you can see the reflection in this picture frame behind me here. It's still nice and bright outside, but I still got my lights going. Let's see, we're a little over a minute in. Hope everyone's getting in. Hopefully some people are getting notifications. I know some people have said that they haven't gotten notifications. Passion for learning. That's the trick, be a lifelong learner. And it's the funny thing is it doesn't have to be necessarily your career that you have to learn about, but just always have that passion for learning, It's funny, I was just talking to someone the other day about this, but Ken Jennings, the guy who currently holds the record for longest streak on Jeopardy, 74 wins. He did a TED Talk where he talks about the importance of knowledge, knowing things, of wanting to learn things, and that ties into that. So it's so great that he has that. All right. Let's see. So we're about 2 minutes in. Hopefully we're getting notifications out there. Well, I don't know what's going on with some people. I know a lot of people have told me that they don't get them until after the fact. So let's see what happens, okay? Now, if you're clicking on this because you saw the thumbnail, we are in our Civil War countdown. See if I can't time the music like I did last time. Now, we're in the top 100, but we're moving into number 96 today, okay? Intelligence. Didn't time it just right, but you get the idea. We are talking about the intelligence agencies of the time. Now, we go, a little soft background music. Intelligence agents of the time. Well, today, what do you think about? You think about the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, right? Now, as you're watching this, and Mark, looks like right now you're the only one in, but as more people come in, hopefully they ask questions. Mark, if you have questions, let me know. But let's get started with our story on intelligence, okay? The CIA, Central Intelligence Agencies, I was saying, their job is to get information. And I think your initial comments of passion for learning and growth, learning, knowledge, information is power. And, if you're in war, speaking of Civil War, I think that really plays a lot into it. If you know what your enemy's going to do, you can do something to stop them or at least get away from them, right? So thinking along those lines, the Civil War had spies just like wars before. If you watched last week, you saw the Miss Jean, and we talked about the spies during the American Revolution. Intelligence operations like this have been going on, for generations, thousands of years, really. Again, the more you know, the better prepared you are, the better you're going to do. So what am I talking about? Well, we're talking about trying to learn the enemy, right? But believe it or not, there wasn't really a official intelligence gathering information at the start of the Civil War, but if you look, there's guys like Charles Pomeroy Stone. I have my notes right here. I'm just double checking them here. Charles Pomeroy Stone was a West Point graduate, and at the outset of all of this, after Lincoln's election, most of the Union military was nowhere near the East Coast. They were sent west. They were fighting Indians, the un-PC term. They were fighting the natives, and they were out in the territories. So with all this turmoil brewing, what are we going to do? So they call in volunteers. And a lot of these volunteers, not really the best. And there was a lot of rumors floating around Washington, D.C. at the time. I mean, the vice president was part of this, actually, not necessarily planning, but he was brought up a lot. You see, there was a lot of Southern sympathizers that talked about kidnapping President Buchanan, who was lame duck anyway, and that way Vice President Breckinridge would be able to take over and seize control of the government. Now, Breckinridge obviously ran for president in the 1860 election, didn't win, but ran, and would go on to become a Confederate general during the war itself. So that's kind of a believable theory, right? Well, here we have Charles Pomeroy Stone, and he's looking around and he's trying to figure out what's going on because being a pro-union guy, he wants to keep everyone safe. Here's rumors. Now, one of these volunteer groups that was protecting the city of Washington was the National Rifles, okay? Well, not all the guys were on the up and up. So what does Stone do? He actually puts one of his guys on the inside, kind of like a spy, talking about intelligence, right? So he puts him on the inside and they learn the plan to take Washington. Well, before this happens, he gets them disbanded. Man, intelligence saving the day, right? Just one of 100 stories we could talk about if we had time, but I'm going to try and keep this fairly short. Now, where does that come from? Where do you get all this information? It's really challenging with spies because, they're spies. They're supposed to be hidden. Some people publish their memoirs after the fact, but really a lot of the information is lost. There's secondhand accounts and, there's stories being passed down and being told, but a lot of this information, unfortunately, is just lost to time. And, we piece together as best as we can. In fact, if you go to the CIA website, they actually have a 50-page PDF that details all these not slave stories. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, and we'll talk about a former slave later in the discussion today. But a 50-page PDF that talks about all these different spy stories, okay? Now, obviously, I'm still continuing my countdown of Michael Lee Lanning's Civil War 100, but there's other sources, okay? Now, what are we going to talk about? Well, Stone. Let's continue with him. At the outset of the war, what happens? April, Fort Sumter. Well, now we have another guy, Charles Pinkerton. Okay, Pinkerton owned what would be the first private eye, the private detective, and probably where we get the term private eye from, because he had a giant sign with a big eye in the middle of it with his slogan, "We never sleep." So private detectives, private eyes, kind of goes back to him, right? Well, before Lincoln could even, talk about what happened at Sumter, George McClellan asked Pinkerton to head up an intelligence service, a military intelligence service for him. And, he does. And, even with all the intelligence, we could tell stories about McClellan. And, later in the countdown, we'll get into greater detail. But, of course, I'm talking about Special Orders number 191, when McClellan is literally handed Robert E. Lee's plans for Antietam, for Sharpsburg, Maryland, and doesn't act on them effectively. And, the bloodiest single day of the Civil War, what could have been, right? But I digress. Now, after Fort Sumter, the war starts. And this is where kind of the focus of Lanning's book goes, is during the war itself. And, really, where did you get your information? If you're a general, you ask a cavalry. Why? Because they can move fast. These are the men that are on the horses. And what they're doing is they're going around the enemy. And, of course, if you're talking about the Confederates, the number one Confederate cavalry commander general is Jeb Stuart, J-E-B, Jeb Stuart. And, the Peninsular Campaign of 1862, he actually, maneuvered completely around the Union. He would, then we could talk about Gettysburg, where he's out raiding, the entire countryside of Pennsylvania, instead of, scouting for Lee. But the cavalry, that was the way he did it. It was this information. Where's the enemy? What's their strength? Where are they moving? That's, you get back to your commander, then you plan your moves effectively. You could, one, counterattack any advance by the enemy, or you could launch surprise attacks. And it was the spies like this, as far as military command. But there were other ways to try and get information. Oh, goodness. If you look at the thumbnail for this video, there's a picture of a balloon. They would literally send men up on balloons, they didn't have drones, but they'd send men up on balloons, to scout the areas. What about, going back the old-fashioned methods of just listening for gossip? I think that's kind of the direction I want to go next is, you would get people who lived in certain areas that were prominent, but on your side. And that's where we get Elizabeth Van Loo. She was the Lady of Richmond. She was a socialite. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her, and everyone talked to her. And she was able to gather so much information for Washington, D.C., for the Union. And you know what? Isaiah, what's up, man? Hey, glad to see you're logged in here. Hope you're enjoying this. If you missed our part of the beginning, make sure you go back, okay? Just a reminder, taking a break, we're about 10 minutes in, but if you get a question or something you want to ask, go ahead and leave them in the chat there or the comments. I'll answer them, okay? And if I haven't said this already, make sure you subscribe because, I do these every week. Now, back where was I? We're talking about the Lady of Richmond, Elizabeth Van Loo. She would get information, pass it along. The Union used this. All right, the people would talk in Richmond, and it might as well have had a glass to the wall and just listen in. Right. But what about other people? It wasn't just the wealthy. And I slipped up when I mentioned slaves earlier. Harriet Tubman. Now, what do you think of when I say Harriet Tubman? You think of, hey, sure, your friends in New York. I appreciate that. Going nationwide now. Awesome. When I say Harriet Tubman, what do you think? Underground Railroad, right? Eventually, if they ever get their act together, they're going to put her on the $20 bill, replace Andrew Jackson. I think that's appropriate. But she was also a spy master. She was one of the leading intelligence operatives for the Union. She was being able to slip in and out, get information, get out. How cool is that? I mean, think about what could be, what would have happened. Me and my what ifs. I talk about those all the time. All right. And then just the fact that communication, grew during this time. I mean, think back to the Revolution. They would hang, laundry out on the wash line, and depending on what color underwear was hanging out there, there would be, yes or no. Civil War. Now there's telegraphs. Morse code. Boom. Message sent instantly. Speed of light. Right? Man, makes it a little more challenging to hide your moves, but also makes it more easy. Excuse me. Makes it easier so that you can actually counter your enemy or make good plans, right? So that's kind of the idea. Intelligence, unfortunately, wasn't valued like it is today, with the bigwigs, because the Navy didn't actually formally form an intelligence branch until 1882, and the Army was even later, 1885. We're talking 20 years, 2 decades after the Civil War, did we have our first official Army intelligence. But nevertheless, it's really played a big part to today. I mentioned the CIA earlier. Now, a couple of things we want to talk about before we wrap this up. The intelligence, gathering and, disseminating of information during the Civil War, you could argue didn't really win or lose any battles, but it certainly played parts, right? And then, because of that and, just the fact that it wasn't official, but it was more, just kind of handled rather than from the top down, it was the bottom up. That's kind of why it's number 96 here, why it's not. If America would have another Civil War, how do you think social media would impact the outcome? Would the influence of fake news, do you think, would make a difference? Mark, man, that's a great question. All right, let me get to that. If America would have another Civil War, how do you think social media would impact? Hopefully you studied Vietnam. In Vietnam, with the video cameras being on the battlefields, there wasn't that. It was hard to censor the information being spread. I talk about the Civil War, and there was no real military censorship. If you go back and look up Civil War letters from everyday soldiers, the privates out in the trenches, right? They tell you where they are, where they're going, what their next moves are going to be. And I'm not talking generals, sending plans like Robert E. Lee's Special Orders in 191. I'm talking to the guy saying, "Oh, my dearest love, I missed you. Oh, by the way, I'm in Fredericksburg. We're marching to Chancellorsville." No censorship. If those letters fall out, you know what I mean? Those are just handwritten letters. You still had to send them to the postmaster. You still had to get them delivered. Now, I hop on Twitter. Boom. Guess what I just said? I announced where we are, where we're moving. Now, it's interesting to bring up the fact that social media, it's not just Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. If you're a runner or a cyclist, you probably heard of Strava. I read an article in Runner's World, I don't know, about a year ago now, maybe a few months ago, and they talked about how the military had to ban Strava because people would use their GPS watches, like I use mine here when I run, and they would use their GPS watches to track their runs. Well, that was mapping out the bases and mapping out their locations, and it was becoming a security issue. So man, how do you think social media would impact anything? I know I'm dancing around that topic. That's a tough one because would it be censored initially or would stuff sneak through? I don't know. And then the influence of fake news. Do you think it would make a big difference to listen? When it comes to fake news, there's always been fake news. It's called bias. It's called propaganda. I can point back to the revolution. Look up, if you just Google the Boston Massacre, what are you going to find? You're going to find, and you look at the images, you're going to find that engraving by Paul Revere where it shows the redcoats just in a line firing into a crowd, and the crowd's all just falling down. That's not really what happened. If you look at the court reports, John Adams, future President John Adams defended the soldiers because it was self-defense, because it really was, a back alley brawl. And, guns got fired, and of course it was manslaughter, but it wasn't murder, right? But man, you look at that engraving by Paul Revere, it looked like an execution. So, there's always been fake news, and, do you think it would make a difference? Oh, goodness. As a history teacher, I always like to, the saying goes, and I always like to say that history repeats itself. Those who learn history are, doomed to watch other people repeat the past mistakes. This is, I think, an example of that. What do you think? Do you think, the media outlets, would play a difference if there was a future civil war? That's a good one. Oh, what else could we talk about? Social media would impact the outcome. I didn't really answer, did I? To answer your question, I think social media might play part in the beginning, but I don't think social media will have any impact in the outcome. And I'll go back to what I said, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes ago, where, espionage and spies and the intelligence gathering didn't win or lose a battle, but it affected it. Social media will probably affect anything that happens, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a civil war. I know we're talking, in the frame of civil war. I don't think social media would do anything that drastic, if that makes sense. All right. So we're about 17 minutes in. As you notice, I'm by myself this week. If you watched last week with, let's see, I think media could polarize it more and private citizens could weigh in from the comfort of their rooms. People can skew it and make it biased, like you said. That's a good point you bring up, people from the comfort of their rooms. I deal with it on this channel. It's very easy to be bold when you're hiding behind the keyboard, right? Things that you would type on a comment on a video is not something you would say to someone face to face. And I think you bring up a good point with that. So hopefully it doesn't come to that, obviously, but I don't know. We'll have to hopefully never find out. Did you watch last week? Mark, it looks like you're the only one in right now. So Mark, did you watch the history, your teacher's favorite history with Miss Jean? I'm looking to make that into a series. Obviously, I can't do it every week, but I'm hoping maybe every other week. Haven't seen it. You want to? I enjoyed it talking because, one, I've known Miss Jean for years, and it was nice to catch up with her. But, when you get two people there in the history just talking, it was just, excitement. Next week, May 13th, if you're watching this in replay, we're talking May 13th. We're going to have another of my installment in Teacher's Favorite History, this time with Mr. Clemens, who is a teacher at Osceola High School. He is retiring this year, so I'm hoping to get him on, and hopefully more than one episode, but he wants to talk some more about revolutionary America. So hopefully that works just as well, and hopefully get people to watch it. I appreciate, Mark, you sharing out the Instagram post. Hopefully get more people to watch these videos. But I think it's time to sign off. I think this has been a good talk. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, drop them in the comments or in the chat. I know there's a delay when we're talking, so if I miss it, I apologize. But I am going to sign off because it's been about 20 minutes. I think that's been a good chat. If you're watching this on replay, if you have questions or anything you want to talk about, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Tune in every Monday at 7 o'clock for Virtual History 360 Live. Have a good night, Mark. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And don't forget to, if you're watching this on replay, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, because I do put out videos either Thursday or Friday, trying to get back on a regular schedule. And then obviously my live streams on Mondays at 7. So for Virtual History 360, I'm Mr. Wade. Good night.